My name is Rabbi Yosef Blau. Among other things, I have been, in the past, the president of Religious Zionists of America. I strongly identify as a religious Zionist to the point where I'm appearing at the conference on video because I've made Aliyah before the conference starts. The major reason why I think it's critical that I participate is precisely because I am a religious Zionist, and religious Zionism in Israel has been captured by people whose right-wing philosophy is very different from the one that I think religious Zionism should have. I come from a certain religious Zionist tradition, starting when I was end of 9th grade, then was in Camp Mosheva, when Bnei Akiva was kibbutz-oriented. Social justice was a basic part of the ideology. The major religious Zionist thinkers that influenced me, and I think have influenced the entire religious Zionist community, of course, is Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik. Both of them, in different ways, have stressed the ethical component of Judaism. Since my Zionism stems from my Judaism, the nature of the society in Israel is a critical component. It's not merely, though certainly not to be dismissed, the ability to defend ourselves, but we're defending ourselves in order to create a society that reflects the fundamental Jewish values. I'm well aware of the fact that within Jewish tradition there are many, many sources, and one can, by selective quotation, support almost any perspective on most issues. In particular, in terms of the relationship between Jews and non-Jews, there are sources that give all kinds of different perspectives. Even let's take a basic concept such as Darkei Shalom, the ways of peace. So in Maimonides' formulation, it's a reflection of our emulation of the qualities of Hashem, right? And the Rambam quotes the pasuk, "Poseach es yodechu masbir kol chai v'ratzon," that God cares for all the creatures. So we emulate that. And there's a Tosfos which seems to imply that it's a much more pragmatic notion in this particular context. It's used in more than one context, that if we don't want the other nations' world to pick on us, then we have to be very careful not to pick on them. Having said that there are more than one perspective, I think that the key notions which go back to biblical texts are very clear. Going back to Avraham Avinu, when Hashem says that I can't hold back and not tell Avraham that I'm planning on destroying Sodom, the explanation given in the pasuk is Manashe Yedate v'Sheyitzave as Banavu Beisav Achrav Lishmar Derech Hashem Lasot Tzedakah U'Mishpat. That which is the qualities that Avram represents and is going to transmit to the future Jewish generations is a commitment to Tzedakah U'Mishpat. Tzedakah is either charity or justice and law. And this is basic to Judaism. And it's reflected in how Avram's going to react to punishing or not punishing individuals in Sodom, not just to particular Jewish implications. And then once again, if you go to the Yeshayahu, in the Haftorah which is said on Parshas Chazon before Tisha B'Av, talking about the terrible qualities that caused the Jews of his time to go into exile. He ends with Tzion v'mishpat tipodeh v'shavehu b'tzedakah. Once again, mishpat and tzedakah are the marks of the redemption of the future. So we have it from the beginning up until the Messianic era. So when we talk about having a Jewish state, we're talking about having a state that's going to reflect Jewish values, well aware of the complications and impracticality of basing a state on halakha when the majority of the people in the state are not observant Jews. However, we can agree on basic Jewish values. And much to my disappointment and shock, it's precisely the religious Zionist community in Israel that's associated with a Zionism that is obsessed with Jewish power. One party, that's what it calls itself, Jewish power. And while certainly part of Zionism is eliminate the notion of Jews being powerless, but that doesn't mean we worship power. We don't worship power. We have a right to defend ourselves. Now, it is true that the barbaristic attack that took place a year ago, October 7th, by Hamas, and Hamas's further behavior even now, is so upsetting that there's a reflexive need to defend Israel defending itself. However, if that means that we're not capable of evaluating everything we do in accordance with the standards that we claim to believe in, it's a terrible mistake. The Israeli army has an ethical code. The ethical code was primarily made by a Jewish philosopher who was an Orthodox Jew, Asa Kasher. And whether 100% kept, no army is 100%, but in recent years, the code has been basically ignored precisely by the element that supposedly reflects religious Zionism, with the claim that this is somehow non-Jewish ethics. So what ethics was Avram Avinu talking about when he talked about a quality of tzedek that he, in effect, demanded from God? So there was some objective notion. I'm not the first to make this observation, obviously. I think it's important that this issue be dealt with. I think whatever one's solution, assuming that one has a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, there's the internal Israel problem. The internal Israel problem is, what do we stand for, right? What does it mean to have a Jewish state? Right? Do we accept the notion of a Jewish democratic state, which means we give full rights to all the citizens, including those who are not Jewish, which is what the Israeli Declaration of Independence, in essence, said, even if it doesn't use those words, and which was signed not only by religious Zionists, people who started by the representatives of Aguda, signed the Declaration of Independence? Or do we have some notion of Jewish superiority that we're only concerned with ourselves? I think it's not Jewish. I think it's disastrous in many ways. I don't even think it's pragmatically smart, but certainly it's morally unacceptable. It is true that we now live in a world where the new old president of the United States seems to be moving in the direction that might is right, But that doesn't change our moral standards, even if the President of the United States doesn't follow it. We never got our morality from the United States, even though obviously Israel and the United States are, there's certainly dependence. We'll call it a mutual dependence, though I think Israel's a bit more dependent than America is on the relationship. I would like to quote something from the Kuzari. I picked the Kuzari because this is a work that is very popular in Israel and is the one that is most associated with the notion of Jewish superiority. It's very open, considering the Jew is a higher level creature, much in contrast with the Maimonides, with the Rambam. So in the Kuzari, after the Jewish Chacham criticizes the Christian and Muslim representatives for hypocrisy. Christianity is a religion of love. What happens when Christians take over the country? How do they treat the non-Christians that are there? They force them to convert or they kill them. Muslims, very similar. So in an unusual moment, because most of the questions that the king of the Khazars asks are basically set-up questions. But in a real question, the king of the Khazars says, well, how do you know that when the Jews are going to be in charge of a country, they're going to be any different? You can't give an answer because the Jews aren't in charge of any country at that historical period. Well, now we are in charge of a country. So are we any different? Well, certainly the implication of the Kuzari is that we're meant to be different. We have 20% of the population in Israel are Arabs. Right? They're full citizens. We talk about the Arabs who live in, call it the West Bank, call it Judea, Samaria. I'm not in the name game. We don't want to give them, we're talking about not giving them those rights. At the moment, they don't have equal rights. So we're certainly not even committed to whatever we do offer to the Arabs in Israel, which are citizens, but certainly not fully equal to the Jews, and we can go into technical details. And then our people talk about expelling all the Arabs out of Gaza. And we'll say other people have done it. Our standard isn't other people have done it. If it is, then any notion of Jewish uniqueness is lost. If you ask the question whether the shift that has taken place within the religious Zionist community has been reflected in responses that I've received because I've neglected the shift, it's been somewhat of an issue, not as much as other people have faced. Number one, because I haven't been doing it from Israel, I've been doing it from America. Number two, rabbi works in ethical issues in the yeshiva, so what do you expect from him? But the truth is, on one hand, if you go back to the history of the early years of the state, we won't even go back before that. So the religious Zionist party, with the different names it had at different times, always had a left wing, a right wing, and a center. With the center, by the way, being dominant for most of the time, certainly during the life of Moshe Chaim Shapiro and then Yosef Berg, who reflected it. But there was always a left, right, and center, and that was acceptable because the primary concerns of it was the Jewish character of the state and preserving aspects of religious life, Jewish religious education. It was not focused so much in this particular political dimension. And that started shifting after the Six-Day War. It became more and more pronounced over time. And suddenly, the part of Rav Kook, which he talks about ethical issues and universalism, has disappeared from the discussion. acceptable version of Rav Kook in many circles is the nationalistic part, right? And the messianic part. I've avoided talking about the messianism, which I've written about many times over the years, because the people I associate with in Israel claim to me that the messianism is not there. I happen to think they're wrong. I think it's just gone under the surface. I think it's as much there as it's ever been before. But I don't have to discuss it in those terms. The issues remain the same even if you leave that out. As a student of Rabbi Soloveitchik, obviously I'm very much influenced by his thinking. I recall very well, though, when students would ask him to comment on religious issues in Israel, he invariably would not answer the question, saying there's a rabbinate in Israel, I'm in America, I don't resolve halachic issues for Israel from America. The one time that I know that he got involved in a very strong way was during Sabra B'Shatila, where he literally demanded from the Religious Zionist Party at the time, it was then Mafdal, that they support a inquiry, or else he's going to denounce them and prove himself. It was so unlike him, because to him it was an ethical issue, and they weren't talking about Jews killing anyone. They were talking about the issue of Israeli troops looking the other way when their allies killed Palestinians in refugee camps who were anti-Israel. So I think when you get some sense, I'm always reluctant to say I know what Rabbi Soloveitchik would say now, or Rabbi Kook would say now, or about anyone who's no longer alive would say now in these circumstances, because I think it's presumptuous and you can get away with it because they're not alive to contradict you. So I'm just saying what I've learned from their writings, and then I take responsibility for what I say. The question of the role that those of us who are concerned and a part of the modern Orthodox world have to play in America this time, when there is such fierce anti-Israel extremist propaganda going on, is a very important question. And while one has to be careful of not giving support to extremist positions, at the same time, there's a real price to be paid for being silent. And one, it's losing. If the leadership doesn't say anything, then younger people who are sensitive to these issues, and I'm far from the first to have noticed the fact that the younger American Jews see Israel in very different terms than people above a certain age. I recall not only what happened after the 6-Year War, I recall what happened before the war. And the fear felt everywhere that there's going to be a second Holocaust. And but people who are 20 plus years old now only knows the strong Israel being the most powerful military force in the Middle East. So their sense of vulnerability is far less. And if they see that the religious leadership, or those who care, don't say anything, then they're going to assume what they say, shtika kodo adam, that everybody agrees. We're all more or less Smotrich and Ben Gvir, even if we don't say it directly. And I think pragmatically, we're going to lose a lot of people. It's very dangerous. And morally, it's a problem. Because if you are unwilling to see complexities of issues and see everything in black and white terms, so you're missing out in the richness of all of religious life, of every moral discussion that takes place. Life is complex, and can, if one side is wrong, doesn't mean the other side is automatically right. It's easier for both sides to be wrong than for both sides to be right, even though theoretically that could happen too, right? We have right to the biblical land, but we understand that the Palestinians who have been living there for so many hundreds of years feel they have rights to the land where they've been living for. They and their ancestors have lived. So it's a problem, right? And there are different solutions. I'm still a proponent of a two-state solution of some kind because I find all the other solutions less practical and less moral. I don't have faith that with all the moderate Arabs are going to lead to one state in which the Jews are treated perfectly fine as partners for the Arabs. And I certainly don't believe in a Jewish state which mistreats others and doesn't give other people rights to be citizens and to function in the country. So I haven't figured out any other alternative, even though it seems totally impractical at the present time. But on principle, if you have a certain principle, even if you can't carry it out, it does affect the policies that you take along the way. I want to conclude on an optimistic note. People on the extremes make the most noise. And in a society, certainly American society at the moment, is very politically divided, as is the Jewish community. And people in the middle often are not heard. But I think that's a temporary phenomenon. I think most people are in the middle. And most people are looking for broader solutions than those provided by one extreme or the other. And I'm really hopeful that this conference will be the beginning of a broader discussion to bring the alternate views out into the discussion. At the point, unfortunately, there's very little discussion going on in the media. Someone who was working on creating dialogue on a college campus said it was impossible at this point, despite the fact that this person had no doubt that the large majority of students were in the middle, because all they could hear were people shouting slogans back and forth. And that's not a discussion, it's not a dialogue, it's not worth anything. And therefore, real conversation to come up with practical solutions, which means one never gets fully what one wants, because one acknowledges the other side has a point, is not appearing. I'll end with a halachic notion. The Talmud in Sanhedrin discusses two ways of resolving disputes in court. One is called din, is the letter of the law, and the other is called pshara. Pshara is an accommodation, a mediation, but it's somehow somewhere in the middle. Not always 50-50, because it's not always 50-50, but it acknowledges that there's some truth to both sides, even though legally in most disputes only one side can win. And which of the two is the one that's encouraged? Well, we encourage pshara. If you go to any rabbinic court today, they'll come first encouraging both sides to sign an agreement that they'll accept a pshara. Yes, the pshara should be rooted in din. It shouldn't be just arbitrary, but it understands that life is complex, there's truth on both sides, and the goal is to find something where both sides get something and there's greater accommodation, and it's a mixture of justice and peace.